Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in again. This is Natalie Stillwell from SoGoesTheFuture.com. Today, I am really excited to be talking with Dr. Roy Dittman. He's the author of a book called Brighten Baby, and it is a voluminous book helping parents to prepare themselves for a healthy pregnancy before they even conceive. Before we go into some of the heavy issues concerning gender identity that we'll be talking about today, can you please tell our viewers more about your educational background and what your passion is behind having written Brighten Baby?
Absolutely. Well, I became a perinatal specialist about 34 years ago. So I started as a monk, really, and I was teaching prenatal yoga in Los Angeles when there wasn't very many yoga centers in those days. So it's kind of unusual to be teaching yoga and to be a music student and also to be a male teaching prenatal yoga. And people would say, well, where's our teacher? And I'm like, well, I'm her teacher. I'm a man. They couldn't figure that out. So I had to explain things quickly, how this was my passion about. I thought, well, how we don't really focus very much on how children form in the womb or how people get conceived. And if we had to know the truth about how our parents conceived most of us, we probably would be quite embarrassed. So, the truth be told. And at the same time, I thought, well, what would happen if people kind of stepped back and designed or planned how they have a baby and made it a very beautiful, intimate experience, and what they're going to eat, and cleaning up their bodies before they conceive. People thought, well, that's why do you need to do that? People were not open at that time. So I that's how I got into it, and I had a very deep spiritual experience along the way, praying and meditating one day. And that really transformed my life, that experience that one day, that this was my real path in life. And I thought it was the best way I could make an impact on this critical period of life when 90% of the human brain and nervous system forms. That determines pretty much who we're going to be in life and what our abilities and strengths will be and so forth. So I thought, well, this seems like a fun, happy way to live one's life, is embellishing who we are. And also, I like the idea of preventing birth defects and diseases in children before they happen. It seemed wiser to prevent it rather than to be a doctor who just treated it afterwards. So those kinds of critical decisions I made a long time ago.
One thing I think is foundational to discuss is what sort of chemicals and substances are abounding today that are having a negative impact on children that are being conceived and that are in the womb and very young and vulnerable.
Well, excellent question. There's so many chemicals, phthalates, these hormonal disruptors like, atrazine, and you see plasticizers, bisphenols, phthalates, and makeup, personal care products, birth control pills, of course, many drugs, and alcohol is a hormonal disruptor. And we see so many toxins. It's kind of scary. I don't like to scare people. But I want people to understand that our intention isn't to scare you or make you think, oh, this is too risky having a baby. Just the opposite. It's just kind of like looking ahead on a highway on your GPS and seeing there's a car accident. You want to know there's a car accident. You want to know that you could hit that car, and it's good to know it before so you're aware of it. It's kind of like that. That's the way I see it. So I don't see it as heavy and significant in the sense that it's scary. I actually see it as a form of, knowledge, and it's very useful to know things so that you can avoid those things. So I see it as a happy thing because the outcomes from the parents who know this and apply it to their daily lives and their lifestyles are extraordinary. We get to see just amazing babies born all the time. And so to us, we're always shocked when people say, oh my God, you're fear-mongering and that's scary and I don't want to hear it. And I said, no, it's just the opposite. This is like a happy thing. Even though we're telling you about something that's, you know, kind of not very good news, it's good news in the sense that you know it before you conceive and you can do something about it. And that's very happy news because that can ensure you have a very extraordinary, happy, beautiful, healthy, intelligent, you know, aware child. So I just want to kind of preface what we're about to talk about because there's some heavy issues here. And so our intention is that you're one of those people out there or couples that listens to this and then you talk, you know, with your husband or wife and say, oh, geez, we should do something about this. And let's make sure that our babies are born and they can live a full life without being distracted by these gender-bending toxins that are in the environment. But to also continue answering your question, of course, heavy metals are major disruptors for hormones, and not just hormones, but you know the critical cellular, intracellular functions and metabolic functions and epigenetic functions. Because when you talk about the atomic elements, you're getting at the basis of not just our metabolism and our cellular physiology, but also the entire universe. So, you know, when you look at that level, at that atomic level, you're getting at the causal level. And so what I look at is this: if you're at cause, when you're causal, you're in charge, you're empowered to now generate a beautiful, healthy, happy family. Because people say, well, how do you know it's going to be a happy baby? I said, you know what? You know what all doctors, pediatricians know, and OBGYN doctors know? Is that, and midwives and doulas, because they see births all the time, they know that a healthy baby equals a happy baby. Now, not everyone knows that, but we know that. Babies want to be healthy. There's 100%, there's no doubt about that. All babies want to be born healthy. No child wants to be born with diseases, with illnesses, with birth defects that are going to hold them back in life or have them suffer. And no parent wants to watch their children suffer. That's probably the most painful thing that a parent can endure. So we look at it as preventive suffering in the first place. But it all starts here in our consciousness, our awareness. But it takes courage because to face these things mentally. This is where the rubber meets the road. People say, oh, just give me the information. I tell you, information doesn't do that much for you. You get information all the time. We're inundated with information. What's a lot more powerful is distinctions. When you get a distinction like, oh, wow, that's the difference between these kinds of babies and these ones, then you can act on it. And then that empowers you to understand that the power lies in your own consciousness. It actually starts with your awareness. It's our minds that get in the way. And we'll go into a little bit of that, how that occurs too. And, you know, so I want people to look at this as something fun, something happy, and something very, very positive, actually. Because we get to see these babies born all the time, and these babies are just so amazing. They're so happy. They're so beautiful. They're so, like, you know, just they just lighten up the room in the hospitals where they're born, or the bedrooms where they're born. You know, you just see over and over again the staff just calling and talking, you got to see this baby. I've never seen a baby like this. It's like, they're just great. You know, everyone's crying. And, you know, so it's a very happy thing. Believe me, it's extraordinary.
So with these sort of scary chemicals that are toxic and that are disruptive to a growing child, how exactly are they getting into women's bodies? And, you know, what's a basic step that you recommend towards cleaning things up even before conception?
Absolutely. Well, very important. What gets into men's bodies too, and it's just as important, actually more important, because the sperm can be damaged. A lot of people A lot of women think that they're infertile when actually it's the man who has damaged sperm that's causing a problem. So we very much encourage men and women to prepare their bodies before they conceive. After all, our role is preconception. Once we've passed the football, so to speak, then it's all in your court, right? And so it's very important that the men understand this. I know most of our audience is going to be moms and future moms, but also share this with your husbands and your boyfriends and your fiancés. With that said, how do these toxins get into our bodies? Well, really every route, from air pollution, from really like the water, of course, unless people have purification systems in their home, and even those are complex to manage, from our food chain, from vaccinations, from drugs, from our ancestors. You know, a lot of people, I call it Santa Monica syndrome. We get people in Santa Monica who live completely pure lives. You know, they do meditation every day, they do yoga, they're vegans, they believe they have this pure lifestyle. They go in the ocean every day and surf. And, you know, it's amazing how clean they do live. And no toxins at all. And yet they come to sometimes to our clinic and say, what happened? Because we have a child with autism. How could that happen to us? But nowadays, it's what our grandparents ate and drank and were exposed to, and our parents. And oftentimes we don't know that. And so these toxins accumulate in the ovaries, in the testicles, generationally. So that means with each generation, for instance, pesticides, it gets worse and worse. But people are not aware of this. When you go to an OBGYN doctor, do they tell you, hey, you know, have you checked your DDT levels? No. And, you know, how long have we known about that? Well, I don't know, Rachel Carson, the famous scientist and author of Silent Spring, warned the U.S. Congress. She addressed the entire Congress and warned us in the 1950s that unless we did something, there was a national emergency that was going to occur where our children in America would be born with massive birth defects. And she predicted the autism epidemic. She could see what was happening with the birds in California. She studied the animals first. And you got to understand that we're spraying $2 billion, 2 billion pounds of these pesticides per year on our lands. That's almost unfathomable. So fathomable, it's going to get in through various means. So right now we're dealing with damage control, and where we're struggling is how do we get the word out to people? I want to tell everybody. I want to create a federal agency with the federal government that says we're responsible for future generations. Doctors, don't come here and participate unless you mean to prevent birth defects. And be authentic, not just to put a Band-Aid on top of it. But, you know, to actually solve this problem and start creating the next generation of Americans. They're actually going to be strong, healthy, intelligent, able to live out a full life without being chronically ill. Right now, we have a disaster because I don't even see healthy children anymore. From my point of view, I go to malls and I just observe people. And it's very tragic for me because it breaks my heart to see so many children so unhealthy. And we don't have to have it that way. We know what to do about it. We know how to prevent it, but we're not doing enough. And that's what I want to tell parents. It's like we can do so much right now.
Yeah, and I definitely recommend to you viewers to get Dr. Dittman's book, Brighten Baby, to get like more specific about how to clean things up even before conception. It's a phenomenal book for sure. Let's get a little bit into, yeah, you're welcome, to some of the heavier issues at hand. what kinds of negative effects are you seeing from these toxins? And even it sounds like probably nutritional deficiencies as well that parents go into pregnancy with, and the children, therefore are lacking certain things they need to develop well. So what are these negative effects you're seeing? And then we can kind of segue more specifically into the effects on sexual development and sexual identity.
Yes. Well, what we see is a kind of an androgenization of babies, because for whatever the damage that it does to our hormones as adults, just imagine how much more sensitive the developing embryonic brain, human embryonic brain, and fetal brain is to these toxins. And so they're extremely more damaging. And not just in one generation, but many generations. This has been shown in animal studies. This is the scary part that we talked about. It's not a nice thing to think about. It's actually horrifying to think about. But it's the reality of where we are, and we have to deal with this. So I want to give you solutions, not just scare people about all the things that are going wrong. What can we do to prevent these kinds of birth defects that are really a given these days? If you're eating out at restaurants, that's just not the way you're going to get there. You have to stop putting toxins into your mouth. And I'm sorry to hear that, because I know some people are sorry to hear that, because everyone likes to go to restaurants. People work hard. They work all day and they come home. They don't want to have to cook a meal, and it's got a lot of kids to take care of. I realize it's hard. I have 4 kids myself. I know what it's like. However, it's worth putting in the extra time to make sure that whatever you're putting into your children's mouths and your own is organic. It doesn't have pesticides in it. It doesn't have heavy metals. It doesn't have MSG. It doesn't have these kinds of additives that we know that are causing brain encephaly, which is another word for brain inflammation, which is really the scientific definition of autism. Autism is a general name, but if we look at what causes autism, what we know now is we know that things like high copper, especially oxidized copper, in either parent can contribute to autism. Why? Because it's very estrogenic. That's one reason. So anything that's estrogenic is going to, which is like pesticides, chemicals, most chemicals, phthalates, these kinds of hormonal disruptors, when they're exposed to sperm or your egg, even before you conceive, are extremely dangerous. And so we have to eliminate those kinds of toxins from our diet. And also GMO foods, soy, wheat, these kinds of pesticides that are used for those kinds of, crops, corn. I think 85% of corn is, exposed to these intense pesticides. And we have to be careful about not only what we put into our mouths and so forth, but what we're being exposed to as well. I mean, if you're a motorcycle cop, right, you're getting exposed to cadmium all the time on the freeway from the exhaust. Because I know I've been doing this long enough, for decades. I see the different professions and how they get exposed to these things. And people are almost never aware of it. I'm like, where did you get all this cadmium? What do you do? Oh, I'm a motorcycle cop. I'm like, okay, I understand. My son is now being vetted for being a cop himself, and he's really into it. And I'm warning, like, here's a healthier way to do it. Here's a less healthier one. But every profession has its downside, and you're going to get exposed one way or another.
So let's flash forward. Let's say parents, they have a child, and as the years are moving along, they see that their child is suffering from an identity crisis about their sex. Is there anything you recommend that a parent do first if they see this sort of effect and symptoms in their child?
Yes, well, there's a lot of confusion about this. This is a very controversial issue. Because here in California, I don't know about in Texas, but it's being treated as a human right, like as if it's some kind of a natural right to be poisoned by pesticides, and now you're going to defend the right to have been poisoned and to be neutered. I mean, what happens to children who are exposed to pesticides is like the boys are born with sometimes undescended testicles, small penises. Sometimes there's even no penis. Sometimes there's hardly any bladder. These are birth defects. This is not normal. As our friend Joel Salatin says, this ain't normal, folks. Mm-hmm. And this is like the time to say that. A problem is that so many people are miseducated in California. What I mean is they have fancy degrees they can hang up on their wall. But it's almost like we've been tricked by our own, cleverness, our own myopic, compartmentalized education, which only teaches one area of science or medicine. And we forgot to think practically, structurally, directly about how these kinds of things will result in birth defects in our children. There's no doubt about it, as Rachel Carson knew in the 50s. It's not changed since then. When a child is exposed to pesticides in the womb, it will make that child androgynous, just like it did in many experiments with chickens and with many birds and other animals, with rats. These experiments have been done since the 50s at least. We've been using pesticides in our country since the 40s. So we, with each generation of that, getting weaker and weaker. But here's where I have a problem with the politics of this. And this is the controversial part. And I don't expect you to agree with me. I'm not looking for agreement. That's the booby prize. I just want you to listen to the facts here. Okay? I want you to be reasonable. Be open-minded. Ask yourself a question. If you're eating at restaurants, if you're eating mystery food, I call it, and you're getting exposed to these pesticides and you're pregnant, do you think that that's going to affect your baby's gonads and hormones and its brain formation? Absolutely. We know for a fact that it causes a boy's brain to have a similar structure as a girl's. That's not normal. And vice versa in girls. Girls are born masculinized. You see them with facial hair. You see a big problem now with bushy eyebrows. They have excess hair on their bodies, like men. That's not normal. They have lower voices. They have these male characteristics because they've been gender neutered. It's almost as if someone said, how do we depopulate the planet the best and most efficient way without people knowing about it? And then we're going to call it a human right. And so we're going to say, oh, this is my right to be called Z or Zer or some other pronoun that they just made up out of thin air. Well, we know biologically there's only a male and female species. And that's true of all of nature, unless you're a microbe. But even there, they have their own, set of genetic rules, you might say. But the epigenetic environment that we've exposed ourselves to has permanently altered some of these species in some ways because it's been relentless and high dosage. And we're paying the price for that. So we must stop that. We must stop it because the worst thing for a parent to endure, and we see this all the time, unfortunately, is to see your child suffer. But what people are doing nowadays is even more obscene. They're saying, oh, it's a human right. Let's see, and if she wants to be a girl or a boy, and he can wear a dress, or this is complete insanity, folks. I mean, it's insane to be accurate. It's truly insane. Because when a child has a physical abnormality like that, to then ignore it and say the child is choosing that is absurd. No child chooses to have a birth defect. That's the most, that's like the most in denial statement I can think of. No child wants to be born like that. I guarantee you. But they don't know what's happened to them. And if you give them a narrative that it's their human right, yeah, sure, they'll take that off, because any child can be indoctrinated to think that it's a human right and that that's the way they were born, so that's their natural way of being. They don't understand that all of human history is counter to that. There's evidence that we only had males and females. We are genetically interfering with the gonads. We're genetically interfering with nature. We don't have a right, in my opinion. There's nothing philosophically or spiritually, theologically, that gives human beings a right to interfere with nature in any way, actually. We are here to be the handmaid of nature, to be the midwife of nature, to help, but to positively intervene, actually. And that's what we're talking about. Positive intervention is what we're doing.
So with a child who's showing evidence of having a defect in their sexual development, whether physically or in their brain or both, do you recommend that a parent maybe see a doctor who's knowledgeable about how to bring the body into balance and seek first, instead of pursuing maybe sex change type therapies, that they would pursue bringing the body into balance and detoxifying and getting the nutritional statuses where they need to be?
Excellent question. Thank you. Yes, there's so many things one can do. And by the way, the Bright and Baby book is for the public. I wrote it so that any family could read it and get a really good start on what to do practically on all these blind spots. And we encourage people to engage us clinically, because that's where you get the very more advanced things. Right? And so there's a lot of useful information in that book for what you're asking about. What are these things that that we can do to fix the hormonal disruption? Well, one of the best things you can do is eat cruciferous vegetables. What are those? It's like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. I know children don't like those, so there's different tricks you can do to get it down them. But also there's now supplements you can use. There's a supplement that's called DIM, or diindolylmethane, and there's a doctor in Boulder who really did most of this research, and I knew him well. And he's the one who first introduced me to it back in 1998. And he did excellent research. I was really impressed with it. And this is something anybody as they age should take anyway. Because what it does is it binds the bad estrogens, you might say, like the estradiol in women or in men, and also the DHT in men as well. These are the ones that contribute to breast cancer and then prostate enlargement. Now in children, unfortunately, they're being born with a lot of these xenoestrogens, they're called. These are toxic estrogenic chemicals that interfere with their hormonal development. So those are things that they can use that are very practical. Other things like activated charcoal. Now you don't take too much because it will absorb your minerals, but just enough that it will absorb these toxic chemicals, and it will absorb heavy metals, and it will even absorb radionucleosides, in other words, radioactive atomic elements that are ionizing, so they kind of can destroy tissues. So those are a few things that people can start with. The other things that you can do is you want to just basically clean your body. If you're detoxing your liver, like veggie juices, root vegetable soups with chicken soup, right? Western price types of fats. Animal fats help flush out the toxins because they're fat soluble. I'd rather have grass-fed butter in you than those pesticides. So the butter helps you to flush out the fat-soluble pesticides. So it's very important for people who have questions even around vegetarianism or veganism. I respect people who do that. They're very good people. I used to be an activist myself. I no longer am. And by the way, I do not recommend it during pregnancy or preconception for many reasons, which I explain somewhat in the book. But the bottom line is, with that, is we need, as human beings, a lot of saturated animal-based fats in dairy products and lots of protein to grow the human fetal brain. That's the short of it. So, we want you to take these kinds of substances that clear your liver, clear your colon, drain your body of, or pull out parasites from your body, might change your internal flora as well, your microbial biome and your intestines, the vaginal, the oral, and of course intestinal and stomach and so forth. These ones are very important because they translate your food into the actual nutrients in a very profound way. Where mostly 95% of our DNA is foreign. It's not human. And it's mostly microbial, actually.
Wow. All right. Way to talk about probiotics. Yeah. And with the meats and dairy, eating clean, healthy animals that are eating according to nature is, the way to go with sourcing
Yes.
that. Yeah. Can I ask you to share an anecdote? You mentioned earlier that there's often issues with high copper. And from my nutrition background, I understand it's correlated with low zinc as well. But, in our discussions outside of today's interview, you've mentioned the effects on, clients that you've worked with when you bring their copper and zinc into balance. Are you okay with sharing about your experience there?
Yes, well, when I first started testing people's hair back in 1992 for the atomic elements, I was quite impressed with what we could find out. First of all, the heavy metals that are in so many people and eliminating those. But when the ordinary, good metals or elements are in an excess amount, they can act and behave like a heavy metal. And copper is one of those elements that can be very toxic to the human fetal brain when it's in excess. And in fact, you see as a strong correlation between extremely high levels of copper in the hair and therefore the internal organs and the brain, where it mostly accumulates in the liver and the brain in the body. And this causes brain encephaly, by the way. This contributes to autism. So high copper, and it usually is oxidized copper, correlates to autism spectrum disorders, whereas low copper, moreover, correlates to neurological disorders such as Down syndrome and deficiency and mitochondrial dysfunction and neurological deficiencies. So these kinds of patterns of high copper usually found in younger women, whereas the Down syndrome more found in older women. Explains part of it, but also can come from the male sperm too. So it's always good to test yourselves as parents if you haven't had a child yet, or if you already have, it's good to know these things. And then you can prevent them from happening. If you notice like, oh wow, I have high copper. Well, you want to eliminate that toxic form of copper so you're not passing that genetic deficiency or problem or abnormality to your child, to the sperm or the egg. So the other thing that we found is these people, and I found this quite by accident, because look, I come from about as liberal of a background as you can find. I have like a 4.0, approval rating with liberal Californians, because I literally lived it. My family we knew every liberal, great thinker and scientist and politician, and we marched with them, and civil rights movement, women's rights, farm workers' rights, you name it, we were there at the forefront of it. Our family absolutely was. And so this is not against anybody. I just want to tell you that I'm not against gay people, what I'm about to say. I'm for everyone's rights. It's just that I think it's important to tell everybody things that can help them understand themselves. That's all. And what they do with this information is their choice. Okay. Now, one of the things I discovered by accident at the time was I had a lot of gay patients. I used to refer these patients, even who had AIDS, to Louise Hay, the famous author. She has her own book publishing company now, Hay House. In those days, she was virtually unknown. It was in the early 80s. And I had a few gay men come back to me and said, "What'd you do to me?" And they were all upset. And I'm like, "What? I don't know. What do you mean?" They said, "I'm not gay anymore. I mean, did you make me not gay? So I'm not gay anymore?" I'm like, "No, I didn't." So, well, something happened because, you said, remember I had high copper and you said it was kind of estrogenic. Maybe, because I don't have it, I'm not gay anymore. I'm like, well, it's an interesting theory. I'll check into it. So I talked to my doctor who taught me, Dr. Nickel, and a few other doctors who knew more about it than I did at the time clinically. And they said, "Oh, yeah, that happens. We've seen that happen." I'm like, "Really?" They said, "Yeah. It not with everyone, but with a lot of gay men and women, we found that when they balance out the copper zinc levels and their elements, they're just not gay anymore." And I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting." I mean, I said, "Did you try to do that?" He said, "No, it just comes from balancing. I don't know why." So it's kind of it gave me insight then to the gestational period. Because look, if somebody already has high copper, say the mother and the father, preconception, it makes sense that now the baby is influenced by this toxic load of copper. But if you read about copper, I mean, it's too much for this conversation, but I could talk 3 days about copper, what it does. But it also correlates in these forms to mental disorders as well, by the way. These people are very highly emotional. But however, probably 95% of your Hollywood types have high copper. And so what I tell parents is you want to have slightly high copper in yourself or your baby. Because it also makes you very creative, like creative geniuses, like actors and artists and musicians and poets have slightly high copper. You just want it to be too high, where they're dysfunctional emotionally and they have a kind of a extreme introversion. They have these kinds of mental problems that go along with it. So there's ways to balance that out clinically that we recommend people, do this the proper way. Don't play with this yourself because you can make yourself highly imbalanced the other way too. So this is where you can engage with us, and we'll have information how you can contact us on the clinical end of things.
Thank you. One reason I really wanted to highlight that powerful example of how bringing the body into balance according to the standards of nature and what constitutes a healthy person is because I think it's important for parents to consider before we encourage our child to explore trying to live as the opposite sex because they have an inclination and a sense that they are internally, that maybe, as you said before, it's more of an issue of fighting for their right to be healthy. Let's do everything we can to make sure their bodies are as healthy as they can be, and then decisions could be made from that place. That seems reasonable, and it sounds
Yes.
That's where
Yes.
you are going with what you're sharing.
Yes.
I'm curious, and you can add any other comments about anything you want, of course, but what, just from a biological level, what is so good about the differences of the sexes that exist in nature?
Well, that's a very beautiful question. This is my favorite question because it really gets into the bottom line, the most important part of why men and women come together and create new life. And I tell more and more people this nowadays because in the beginning of my career, I was all focused on the supplements and the science and, the lab results and, looking like a smart doctor. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not putting it down. It's just that sometimes we forget about the spiritual and the emotional and the relationships. I now say just the opposite. I say, look, the most important thing, the most important element that we can exercise, you might say, or part of our being that we exercise is our relationship to our mate, to that one who we love, our beloved, and to express it fully. And that's why you make love, because you're expressing your love by making love. And we forget, there's so much porn on the internet now. And we go through this in Bright and Baby about, the dangers of the dots on the screen, I call it, versus, a real living, human, breathing female who truly makes love to you. Nothing can substitute. Now they're going to have robotic sex. Please save me from this nonsense. Look, we will go insane. We will spin out of control if we start doing these things. We must draw a line and say, no, enough. No robotic, killer robots. Elon Musk is coming out against us. We were born to live free and happy and natural lives. We're not meant to live like this. We don't need artificial worlds. We don't need synthetic chemicals. We must reject these interferences in our lives. And we must preserve the intimacy that has man write poetry to a woman he loves, that writes beautiful songs, that writes, paints a beautiful painting. This is what drives the soul of men. No, men don't like to admit this. We like to pretend we're tough and we can handle it. We get into arguments. But the truth is, when you talk to men, and I've led men's and women's groups for over 30 years, and I have a whole series, a 10-week series I do, take people through this, because we handle these issues in a very grounded, practical way. Because look, I know when you get men all by themselves, they talk very differently when they're around women. That's why we have it only for men and only for women. And women are, when they're free to talk, also completely different when they're talking amongst themselves. And you know what? What naturally happens is you get back to your organic self again. You regain yourself. You become authentic with yourself. And you ask yourself questions, simple things like, what do I really want in my life? Do I want happiness? Do I want a beautiful family? What makes us happy as human beings? What fulfills us? What fulfills that chalice, that cup of love, truly? And that's where I think that we can resolve these issues. Because if somebody has that intention, they will naturally be drawn to anything that's going to now be a manifestation of that love, which is a child. A child is a manifestation of our love. It's a full expression of that. But there's a whole nother party to this that sometimes we forget. I'm going to say a G word here soon. It's God as a party to this. But sometimes we exclude God from that party. And I think that's a big mistake too. That's just my personal view. And, but I always remember that's how I got started. And I think God guided me along this way to communicate this to people. So that, because think about it, what kind of parents would you want to come in this world with? The ones who truly expressed God's love when they made love to each other and brought that into manifesting you so that you could serve the world too in God's name. And so I think that that's the element that's the most important element, not the copper or the zinc or the whatever. Those are the most important thing. And I'm not saying just to be cute or popular. I really mean this. In other words, I found that when parents do this, then the rest is easy for them, actually. And so I call it the shortcut route. Just make that commitment that you're going to do whatever it takes to, have the healthiest baby. And I've never had one couple ever say that they regretted that. I've had couples come back and say, I wish I had done what you told me in the beginning, because, it didn't turn out so well. So, that's where I think it needs to go. And I think that when people are healthy mentally, spiritually, energetically, um, mentally, that they that's reflected in their children. You can see it in the quality of their babies. That's just my theory. I can't prove that scientifically. You can never quantify spiritual love, okay? You can't measure it with an instrument in the lab. But this is the most important quality. And I see this undescribable quality in these children. And I think that's why so many people in these hospitals where they're born get just so excited. It's like these kids are like little rock stars. And they're just, you see the nurses and the doctors come in there, and they all have tears in their eyes. And it's like, they're just so moved by this. See, those kinds of things you don't see very often. And so, it's worth doing the hard work, people. I recommend people prepare like about a year before they conceive a baby these days, because there's transgenerational accumulation. There's so many things to do. I want to clean up your bodies. I want to strengthen your bodies, regenerate your bodies, keep you in really good shape. And if you're over 40, for a woman especially, I want you to, think about stem cell therapy. And by the way, here's a little plug for what we're doing. In Asia, we're launching the most advanced fertility stem cell agreement, like partnership, you might say, with the top fertility doctor and also hospital, clinic, and myself, and with world-renowned Nobel laureates and specialists as well in this area. Organic, natural. This is ethical stem cells. It's very effective, and we're taking the typical stats in fertility success from 38% to 68% with this. It's very good. So I recommend that people do these kinds of things rather than the synthetic drugs and the IVF. I predicted long ago that freezing sperm and eggs and embryos and the other synthetic methods would show defects in the eyes and kidneys. Back in the late 80s, I predicted it. And my biotech background is in spray freeze drying. And my company, Nanospherics, had an agreement with UT Austin, patenting agreement. We had the most advanced pharmaceutical method of freezing. So I know a lot about what the damage is caused by freezing. We solved that problem for the FDA, actually. Long story I won't go into. And with my company, Biophysics, we had an agreement with the University of Illinois as well for drug delivery and dietary supplement delivery. We know a lot about cell membrane function. And, when you look at, this area of perinatal medicine, we must keep it as organic and natural as possible. Because no matter what doctor you talk to, even the really conventional ones, when you get them alone over dinner or a cup of coffee or tea, we all admit drugs and babies don't mix. We know it's not ideal. We know that there's better ways to do this. And so we're gradually training doctors in our hospitals and in our clinics all over the world to be perinatal specialists and people to be perinatal coaches, because we need people to get the word out and to be trained properly how to prevent these birth defects before they even happen.
Wow. That's amazing. I just want to echo back what I'm hearing as we're wrapping up our interview. Even though I know just from talking with you again outside of this time that you were raised with a lot of atheistic influence, your father was a nuclear scientist, and you have a very scientific background and you're brilliant, of course. Still, you're saying nature knows best, and that, it's kind of foolish and arrogant of us to try to go above and beyond nature and sort of play God and take things outside of what nature has established for procreation, for the sexes, and that it's beautiful to be healthy, and health accords with the natural design that we see. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us today. I think Probably a lot of our viewers would love to get in touch with you or follow you in some way. What's the best way for people to keep up with you and what you're up to?
Well, thank you, Natalie, for your graciousness. The best way to get a hold of me and the Brighton Institute is my name, just Roy Dittman, spelled with 2 T's and 1 N, Dittman, Roy Dittman @gmail.com. And also my Skype address is Dr. Dittman, so just spelled DOCTOR, Dittman, same way. And you can reach us through our websites as well. You can look online. And if you want to call us directly, our clinical number in California is 949-302-9007. That's 949-302-9007. And I just want to thank you, Natalie, and acknowledge you because there's so many moms in this world, and I see many moms in the world struggling, and we all make mistakes as parents. I'm sure we all reflect and say, "Oh, I wish I had done this. I wish I had done that." Oh boy! And believe me, I made mistakes too early on, and we all do. But it takes. I just want to applaud your courage, and your ability to inspire others, and your ability to take the kind of the lead point and lead people in a direction out of their troubles. And I know it's not easy, but what you're doing is extraordinary because it takes a lot of courage to do this, because there's not a listening for this right now. And I know that it's hard for you, but thank you so much for getting the word out to parents so that they can actually prevent birth defects before they happen. Thank you.
Thank you. So great to talk with you today.
Absolutely.